Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a meeting of the Solent Growth Forum on this lovely, hot, sunny day. First of all, nice to see you all here. Let's look at the agenda. Item 1, attendees and apologies. Do we have any other apologies from the list that Lawrence circulated? No? Okay, that's fine. We also have the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 30th of January at the Guildhall, Portsmouth. I take it everyone has got a copy of those minutes? Sorry?
Yes.
Are you content with those minutes and happy that I can sign them as chair?
Yeah, I'll move.
Agreement. Thank you. Thank you, members. Okay, we have items for discussion and decision. Item 2, Solent 2050 and Economic Recovery Plan discussion, draft update. We have Lichfields who are going to present this. I believe we have Kieran Gunn-Jones and Lucy Bailey. I'm not quite sure who is due to present.
They are both in the waiting room, ready to be admitted when you are.
Please admit them.
Admitting them now.
Good morning, Lucy and Kieran.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please, go ahead.
Excellent timing.
Kieran, before you do, Graham, can I just add one comment from the board's point of view, from the LEP?
Certainly.
We've got the people who've been helping us from Lichfields, Kieran and Lucy, do this. But we talked about this plan when we were with you in January. What we've now had is various updates, and it's been back through the board, and the board feel it's a good position, and we're now wanting to consult widely, and this is part of that. So this isn't a done deal yet, but it's at a state where the board feel we've got what we think are the key things in there, and it seems to align with the early consultations we had with you and other groups. So what we're looking for today is thoughts and comments before we go to the final stage on this. So I just wanted to set that context before they started.
Thank you, Brian.
Please go ahead, Kieran, Lucy.
Great. I'm going to try sharing my screen just to get a few slides. Okay, so can everyone see that slide on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Good start. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for inviting us along to the session this morning. We're hoping it's going to provide, as Brian says, a good opportunity to kind of bring you up to speed with the work that we're doing with Anne-Marie and the rest of the team at the LEP to shape their emerging economic recovery response to COVID-19. So we thought it'd be useful just to run through a few slides to sort of set the scene for the work and the sort of context for the recovery plan. In particular, the evolving macroeconomic outlook that we're all facing, the approach that we're taking to developing the economic recovery plan for the Solent, and how that aligns with and sort of feeds into the longer term economic vision for the area that's set out within Solent 2050 strategy. And then we've got a few minutes, I think, at the end to sort of hand over to you for your input and feedback, in particular your perspective on the emerging impacts, areas of intervention to sort of guide recovery over the next few weeks and months, and potential opportunities that the pandemic presents to drive growth and innovation within the Solent as we look to restart and rebuild the economy. So I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that we are in the midst of an unprecedented period of economic disruption, with the initial economic shock quickly leading into a period of global recession that clearly we're not immune to. The full impact and extent is obviously unfolding kind of on a day-to-day basis, and will be highly dependent on lockdown easing and measures taken by the government to get the economy moving again. And we've started to see some of those, for example, through reopening of non-essential shops last week, and the various kind of other relaxations that will be coming in from the 4th of July. The most up-to-date economic indicator we have, which was released by ONS a couple of weeks ago, shows that the UK economy shrank by 20% in April, and that's the sharpest monthly decline in GDP since records began. And that reflects widespread falls in services, production and construction output, so right across the board in terms of sort of the economic hit. And at a UK level, the Office of Budget Responsibility predict that GDP could drop by about 35% in the second quarter of 2020, And whilst we're all hopeful that the output will start to pick up again and sort of bounce back later in the year, the overall scale of the shock is likely to be more significant than anything that we've ever seen before. So given the sort of fast-moving situation, it makes it quite difficult to fully quantify the impacts of COVID at a local level. I mean, there are kind of emerging sort of data sources and trends available, which we're kind of working through in sort of real time. But by way of illustration, if the OBR's macro level scenario that I just mentioned in terms of that 35% drop in GDP were to be replicated within the Solent area, we could be looking at a short-term economic hit equivalent to nearly £11 billion. So clearly very, very significant within a Solent context. We know that the area is particularly exposed to negative impacts associated with international trade and global commerce, given its kind of UK gateway sort of status and sort of reputation, and the key parts of the marine and maritime sector in particular are really struggling at the moment, in particular the sort of cruise industry, sort of ferry operators, that type of thing. And we also know that the area's visitor economy will be feeling the effects of travel restrictions, and as people continue to sort of stay at home, particularly as we enter the busy summer season, and we expect many parts of the area to be kind of heaving and full of life and full of spending at the moment. The universities play a crucial role within the Solent landscape by providing the skills and the talent pipeline that local businesses need to grow and evolve and diversify. But they're obviously facing significant challenges at the moment and constraints, and particularly as we kind of think ahead to sort of the September term, many kind of question marks remain as to how that's going to work. And then, like every other part of the country, the resilience of local businesses are clearly going to be tested at the moment, in terms of a wide range of demand and supply side challenges imposed by this pandemic. And I guess for SMEs in particular, that's going to be a key challenge in terms of how they respond over the next kind of few weeks and months.
Thanks, Lucy. So, in that context, I think it's pretty critical to see that the sort of economic recovery is going to be really important. So, the LEP at a very early stage identified the need to develop an economic recovery plan, which is going to be aligned to Solent 2050, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Effectively, to support the transition of the Solent economy back to what we all hope will be a state of relative normality, and of course, importantly, eventually sort of growth once the pandemic and any sort of wider recession that follows eases. So what we're doing through the recovery plan is we're focusing really on short-term actions over the next year or two. And what we're looking to do is, if you like, bridge the immediate sort of COVID-19 business support measures that have been put in place by the LEP and others, and those that have been happening over recent months, with some of the longer-term growth and productivity ambitions for the Solent that are set out in the 2050 strategy. The recovery plan element is intended to be a very sort of practical resource for the LEP and its partners. And we see it identifying a number of cross-cutting interventions that are likely to need to come forward. And just to give you an illustration of what some of those will probably be, firstly, looking at provision of sustained support to the local business community, given how critical that is and how much disruption has occurred. Working closely with the Skills Advisory Panel to look at how we can really reflect and target our skills and training provision in what are clearly going to be a very different set of labour market circumstances than we might have anticipated at the beginning of the year. And also a renewed emphasis on the LEP's capital investment programme. How can we turbocharge some of those projects, get those happening to create that local sort of economic stimulus, if you like. So that's the essence of what the recovery plan element of the strategy now is going to be doing. In terms of the process that we've been working through over the last couple of months now on bringing that together, Firstly, understanding what the economic impacts of COVID-19 have been locally. This is obviously a very real-time situation. Data is emerging constantly, but what we're trying to understand as far as we can is what have the effects been, how have different sectors and locations been impacted, and also what does that recovery profile look like depending on what type of business or what type of sector you work in, and how have different parts of the Solent going to fare in that context. From that, what we're doing is we're identifying broad areas of intervention. So, for example, some of those I've just mentioned. What we're really looking to do is where can we help mitigate some of those effects? Where can we support recovery, stabilise the situation, and try and move the Solent back to be in its best place for that return to I guess the kind of new normal is the phrase that everyone seems to use, but in a sense, what that different world that we will be in the months and years ahead. And then the final output of this will comprise an action plan. So it's not a strategy in itself, because it sits alongside and is intended to support Solent 2050. But the action plan, part of the recovery plan, is very much about specific interventions, how they're going to be achieved, the funding and resources mix that we'll need in order to deliver those, and the timeframes and some of the sequencing around when those will need to happen. Now, it's really important to say that we've been really fortunate to have drawn on lots of consultation and engagement with different groups. So over the last couple of weeks, talking to the different sectors, talking to different businesses, trying to get a sense of where they see the position currently and how they see it faring in the future. And that's important, particularly when we don't all have the data at this point in terms of what those effects are. So that anecdotal feedback is really important to us. Now, as Brian said at the beginning, this is very much aligned to and intended to work in supporting Solent 2050. So just as a reminder about Solent 2050, that's our ambitious long-term vision and strategy to boost productivity and prosperity across the Solent. And I guess, given the context has changed, we very much see that the economic recovery plan and the actions associated with it will in many ways represent, I guess, that early stage focus of Solent 2050. So we see very much the two things working together, and some of the initial activity of Solent 2050 will actually be around effectively economic recovery actions. So the actions will be framed around and respond to the 6 strategic priorities. So the graphic there on the slide is a reminder of the vision statement that is at the heart of Solent 2050 and the 6 strategic priorities that sit beneath that. And one of those that's been added to Solent 2050, and perhaps since the earlier drafts of it, is the last one on the right, an outstanding business environment. And I think we knew that was a really important area, and I think given all that's happened and the real need to focus activity around the business community going forward, it's absolutely kind of critical that that one has come into the frame. So there will be a good synergy between the recovery plan and Solent 2050 on that basis. Now, we thought it'd be worth just giving you a bit of a flavour of some of the emerging themes that have come out of all the discussions that we've had, and things that I think are going to feature or will be featuring within the recovery plan. It's not an exhaustive list. There's not enough time to give you lots of detail about it, but I wanted to just pick out and share with you and get your reflections on some of these if possible. Firstly, there's been a real consensus about the need to accelerate key development and infrastructure projects across the Solent. Those that are, if you like, shovel ready to kickstart investment and to stimulate economic activity. A real sense that we need to be driving forward and turbocharging that, if you like. Secondly, it's very clear that a number of sector-specific interventions are going to be required, tailored to our key industries and clusters. So we've mentioned here maritime, tourism and hospitality, advanced manufacturing. It's not just those, it's others as well. But actually they are in very different positions in terms of the effects they've felt and what their recovery is going to look like and the confidence around that. So we need to work, given their significance to the Solent, we need to work very hard with each of those sectors to give them the support that we can and that they need. Thirdly, a lot of views about this is absolutely the time for responsive skills and training provision. That's not a new agenda item in itself, but some particular things that we need to focus given that the situation is very different. So, for example, how do we look at sort of retraining, particularly as the labour market now changes? How do we, for example, as we saw at the time of the last recession, help people who've been made redundant, perhaps start up businesses? How do we make sure they can access the skills that they need, perhaps if they are not traditionally used to doing that? And lots of our SMEs saying, well, actually, we knew digital skills were important. They really are important because the last couple of months has been a very steep learning curve, probably for all of us, in respect of the virtual and digital world. So a real additional emphasis on that, but also, for example, new things. So how can we get businesses better placed in terms of exploring e-commerce, and how does that then help longer term resilience in terms of their adjustment to the world after COVID-19? Fourth, as I mentioned earlier, the business support offer is absolutely key. I think we just need to look at how do we sort of recast and evolve some of that, perhaps, as we move from the, if you like, the kind of economy restart through recovery and renew. And also a lot of the challenges businesses are facing are actually some of which are at the quite sort of basic level. How do you manage a business in difficult time? How do you deal with financial issues? How do you deal with sort of HR and recruitment issues and all of those things? Not all businesses have that knowledge and can access that support and know where to get it. And then last but not least, I mean, this is not unique to Solent, I suppose, but I think is something that's come out very strongly, is that sense of the means that we can boost local consumer demand and confidence. So, how can we attract spending back into our town and our city centres? And are there things that we should be thinking about locally, for example, through promotional activity, local purchasing campaigns, for example? How do we get the community back together? And one of the things that many people have commented on is how, through all the adversity of the last couple of months, local communities have really come together and use that as a kind of real positive force. So how can we take that forward and use perhaps the rediscovery of some of that as a sort of a really helpful way of framing the kind of future platform for growth? So a very sort of short summary overview, but hopefully just gives you a sense of some of the areas of focus that I think are coming out very strongly from what people have said to us. So just in terms of any sort of points for discussion, obviously welcome your views or feedback on what we've just said, but we continue to be very open to thoughts around, firstly, what those key areas of impacts have been, and do you see any particular important distinctions in terms of the within the area and in terms of different sectors that you think we should be aware of? I've mentioned some potential opportunities for intervention and support. Do you have any sort of additions or thoughts on that? And I think it's really important, finally, just that we don't forget, how can we take from this potential sort of growth opportunities for the Solent? There's already been some excellent examples of innovation through adversity. How can the Solent and its business community really take those and use that going forward as we move into delivering Solent 2050?
Well, thank you for that, Kieran and Lucy. Has anyone any questions at all? I can't see any raised hands. Can you all hear me?
No raised hands.
Okay. Are there any questions at all from members? No? Well, as I say, thank you, Kieran and Lucy, for that. We are in a very fluid time, in very dangerous times, you might say.
Sorry, it looks like Tristan and Michael just put their hands up.
Okay, Tristan.
Sorry, Chair. I wasn't going to ask a question, but just as a statement, I think it's really good to see it aligned, the recovery plan aligned with the longer term 2050 deal. Just an observation as well, in terms of the timescale for the recovery plan, And an ask is, if we're going to do it quickly, we're going to keep an eye on the long-term plan. What that means, we're going to need to see money come out the door a little bit faster in some of this, and the governance needs to be reflecting the speed that we need to move at, while obviously being prudent and sensible in terms of having the right level of cover. But it's just it's going to be fast track. It needs to come out quickly, and I think the governance just needs to be appropriate to the situation. It's just an observation.
No, I think it's a very good one, Tristan. Do we have someone else who wanted to speak? Yes, Michael.
Thank you, Graham, and my apologies for the late intervention. It's on the recovery plan itself, and it's just a question around conversations with tourism bodies. So here, and I will pick out the Isle of Wight because it's very close to my heart, and being an owner of a very small tourism business. Visit Isle of Wight, for example, are liaising with the Isle of Wight Council on a day-to-day basis. Bearing in mind the recovery plan with the Solent let, is that something that's already happening with you guys? I mean, are you liaising not just with Visit Isle of Wight, but there must be other tourism bodies out there for different areas of the Solent that could be brought into this conversation? I'm sure it is, but I'm just wondering if you can confirm that for me.
Brian, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, and I might pull in SJ as well, because she's been chairing the recovery group. But we've been trying to liaise with most groups in the area, and certainly we've got a large forum which has had pretty good membership. SJ, do you want to come in there and just comment on who you've had on your group?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Once a fortnight, we've basically had 95% of local authorities in the LEP region and business representative organisations from all over come together for an hour and discuss the challenges and what's happening, obviously initially with all the grants that were being dispersed down. And now we're moving through the process like everybody else and looking at the recovery and what we at the LEP can do. And we're gathering all that data, we're feeding that data up through the channels, and we're also feeding back through the local authorities and disseminating the information we receive as well. So it's been a real two-way process, and it's really brought local authorities together, it's brought business representative organisations together across the entire region. And I think it's had, there's been enormous impetus to make it work, and the sharing has been fantastic. I'm sure Anne-Marie would like to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, SJ. And specifically on the question about the visitor economy, because it's absolutely agree with Michael, it's such a vital part. The Local Enterprise Partnership are also working with the Local Resilience Forum, and there is a business and economy work strand which is looking at key sectors, because clearly the pandemic has hit different sectors at different times in different ways. Within that, there is a visitor economy working group which brings together representatives from the Isle of Wight and also the mainland. The LEP is supporting that, and we are working with colleagues, which includes local authority representatives and representatives from some of our visitor attractions. And I think you will see within the recovery plan a sort of commitment to work with partners through the region to develop a visitor economy strategy, which again will follow very much the rhythm that Kieran described. You know, that short term, how do we support the this key sector to sort of regroup and recover from what has been a very challenging time. And then in the medium to long term, let's not forget what a fantastic sector it is and how rich it is in terms of the assets that the Solent has to offer visitors domestically and internationally. So we don't want to lose that ambition that Kieran described earlier, but we also want to be very practical about the journey that the sector has to take in the next 12 to 18 months. So absolutely working with colleagues from local authority, business, and the wider community. And Chair, I can pick up the funding issue both in item 3 and 4, if that's okay with
That's fine. That's fine. Anne-Marie, SJ, Brian, thanks for that. Michael, are you happy with that? Thank you. Do I have any other questions at all?
Thank you.
Can I just make one brief reply to Tristan's observation?
Certainly.
Tristan, thanks for that observation, and we've certainly been conscious of trying to enact things quickly, and SJ's group and the funding streams we put together, both with the crowdfunding and the loan scheme we've launched, have been trying to do that quickly. I think we'd also like to reflect on one other thing, though, that what's clear is, I mean, we come up with different statistics, but there's certainly 40 or 50,000 businesses in our area, and almost every business is suffering. And we saw some of our neighbouring LEPs, when this crisis happened, immediately saying, if you want some money, please apply, without really, to be honest, much thought about what interventions would be most useful. And one of our neighbouring LEPs opened a fund like that and had to close it within about a few hours because they had too many applications, which then meant they had to give the money out basically first come, first served. And our board took the decision that that is not a good way of allocating money, that clearly we'd love to fund every business in our area and we can't. So what the right thing to do was to move money that we could move quickly, which we've done. So we've moved several millions into a grant fund and a loan fund. And then also to take a conscious decision about where the interventions would make the most difference to fit in gaps in some of the government interventions. So I just wanted to add that I agree with you about pace and speed, which we've been trying to do, and SJ's been coordinating that with the group. But the second one is focused interventions, understanding that we can't fund everything. And that's what we've been trying to focus on.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Tristan, before. Sorry, I forgot to mention you. Philip, do you have a question?
I do. A comment first. I've had my Zoom hand raised technically, so I'm not sure who's picking up what. I don't know how the system's working. I'll now lower that. No, it's really to pick up on what Tristan, Michael and Brian said. I mean, certainly in what's been presented today and the aligning of the recovery with the strategy and some of the subsequent details that were provided by Brian and Anne-Marie, etc., are really encouraging. From the perspective of this group's function, however, it's really hard, from my perspective, having just been given a very short, high-level PowerPoint presentation, nothing within which I could not disagree with, nothing with which I couldn't but agree with. It's all very positive, but actually I'm not convinced there's enough detail there for us to really say, to really understand whether you're doing good or not, or indeed to say, as Tristan alluded to, that all the governance and mechanisms, particularly in this situation where we need to respond quickly, are all in place, and decision-making processes. So for other things, the more I can get in hard copy in advance of meetings, so I can have a real look at it, I would appreciate greatly, and would then give us perhaps more time to get into further detail about the specifics of not, as I say, not just the high level stuff, but in practice, how it's working. I thought it was very illuminating what Brian had said there, because I was aware that some LEPs had suddenly said, you need help, come and get money, and then that all very predictably had to be stopped. And we've held back, I understand now from what you're saying, but I'm not exactly sure how it's been processed. I think you get the drift of what I'm saying. The more sight we can have of things, the more detail we can have, the better we can give a oversight scrutiny view on whether what's been done is right. Can't disagree with anything that's planned. I just don't have enough insight of the detail of the practicalities of where it is to say fantastic or not. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Philip. I think that's very true. I think it would be a lot easier if we got it before if possible and gave us a chance to read in depth and analyse. And Nicola, thank you for your little message. I was concentrated on the faces in front of me. I didn't see the screen on the side saying that Philip had his hand up. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions on that item at all? Right, thank you, members. We now go on to item 3, which is the overview of the LEP capital programme, the financial and status update, and update on the work underway to evaluate the impact of the local growth deal investment today. I believe this is Anne-Marie.
Chair, I can pick this up if you like from the finance perspective to start with.
Thank you, James.
Lauren, are you okay to share the presentation, or do you want me to share mine locally? You've done it, have you? Thank you. So, members, we've just got a very short presentation, so it's 2 slides really. So, Lauren, could you just go back to the slide 2, please? That's great, thank you. So that's our introduction. So, conscious that this is sort of quite a new group, and the LEP budget is sort of quite large, quite complex. So, and I do take the point just now about having some more detail. But what we're trying to do with these 2 slides is just to give you a real overview to start with of the LEP budget. We're going to look then at the area of the main spend, which is the local growth deal capital programme. But as we're going to say later on, is that if members would like to,
water, I can feel my mouth going.
If members would like to have a look at a particular scheme or a particular programme in more detail at another meeting, then very happy to do so. So this first slide really refers to your Appendix B, which is the whole budget for the LEP. So since its inception, the budget now totals about £250 million. So obviously a lot of money, and nearly 3/4 of that is the local growth deal capital programme, which is actually broken out into Appendix A in your papers. Within that, as I say, just an overview at this point, there's about £17 million that goes towards business support, and that's the SME support programmes, and there have been a number of those, and that's ongoing. Within the critical infrastructure, that's most of the local growth deal, but some of the local growth deal is for sort of key skills and innovation projects as well. So you see some sort of big numbers against the skills investments for certainly a couple of colleges, one on the Isle of Wight we've been talking about today. And also sort of within the strategic sectors of the LEP, certainly maritime and the innovation side as well. And there's been a cost as well across all of the years of the project, of the LEP, to sort of fund the operational costs of the LEP, but also the strategy work and so on that it's been doing. So we're at quite a key point now in the LEP budget as it stands, because the local growth deal, of which you can see in the top there is 178 million. We've still got 68 million pounds to spend of that, and that forms the major part of the final amount of the budget of 75 that we've got to spend by March 2021. So there are some challenges there, and we'll sort of pick some of those up on the next slide. But what we've always done as a LEP is we've always been very proactive, and where we can, we've moved funding into future years where we've got the flexibility to do so, to at least give the certainty around the ability of the LEP to continue, to even just monitor programmes if there isn't any additional capital funding, which we're very confident there will be. But so today's focus is on the local growth deal capital programme itself. So if we can just pop forward to the next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. So as I said, this is broken down scheme by scheme in your Appendix A. A lot of the projects are in the earlier years. They're complete now. We're in the monitoring stage, and the economy's seen the benefit and continues to see the benefit of those. So of that local growth deal, we're heavily measured by government on this, and by the end of March 2020, we had 75% of that money actually spent and given to beneficiaries for projects that are actually taking place, and not money that's just gone out so they can hold it for when they're ready to spend it. We've had to do a return last week to government to show how much of our funding has been contractually committed, because they've actually withheld the last £3 million of the funding that is due to all LEPs, but for us it's only £3 million, and we've been able to sort of show them that we're 99% contractually committed, so we need that money. So we're quite confident that money should come through. Like I said, just of the local growth deal, we've got £68 million remaining to spend in the last 9 months of this year, so it is challenging. There's a heavy focus on this, and I think what I'll do now is if I just hand over to Steve from the LEP executive, Steve can talk a little bit more about the operational side, and I know he's going to sort of introduce AECOM as well, who've been doing work on this. Very happy to answer any questions either sort of now or at the end of this item, if that's easier.
That's fine, James. Okay, Steve?
Thank you very much, Chair. That's great. In terms of, sorry, can we keep those slides up, please, Lauren? There's just a couple of points I need to talk to on there. While that's loading up, James has outlined what's a challenging programme of delivery for the LEP, I think, in 2020-21 from a capital programme perspective. But we are in the fortunate position, and it's worth bearing this in mind, that we actively front-loaded the Growth Deal programme with significant project delivery and associated spend on those projects in the early years of the Growth Deal, so going back to 2015-16. The current year, 2020-21, has two major projects in the delivery phase and also a selection of smaller projects which are now either in the final stages of construction, and they include things such as the Fareham College project to construct their civil engineering training centre up on the enterprise zone, and also Kinetic's project to build the National Maritime Systems Centre, of which we're contributing to an SME innovation and collaboration hub up on Portsmouth Hill. There are also a couple of projects that have recently agreed contracts with the LEP, and that includes the work to improve the A326 and also the University of Portsmouth Centre for Extended Reality, which is down within the university complex and was the subject of a front news story on the front page of the news last week, which is fantastic. Those projects are starting delivery as we speak. In terms of the two major projects, both Stubbington Bypass and North Whiteley have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as one would expect, but both have bounced back very positively. In line with government guidance, development on the bypass and housing construction at North Whiteley stopped in early April, but both were back on site within a very few short weeks. Construction is really progressing well on the bypass, and that's a really important project for us as it improves transport links within the peninsula, including opening up access to the enterprise zone at Daedalus, which is a crucial asset for us and for the region. In relation to North Whiteley, both elements of this scheme, the highways infrastructure and the housing development, are now progressing really well, with over 300 homes under construction at present. So they're the two biggest projects we have on the books this year. In terms of future meetings, and as James said, we're conscious that this is still a growth forum that's finding its feet. Members may wish to have a read through Appendix A in the pack, and maybe request a specific focus on some projects in there which pique their interest, or indeed specific sectors that we've invested in or geographical areas, and we can share more of that detail on future meetings. In terms of managing the delivery of what's a challenging programme, and throughout the life of the growth deal and in this crucial last year of the current growth deal, we measure and monitor risk in relation to delivery, finance and reputation at both project and programme level. This is provided to both the board and central government colleagues as part of our quarterly monitoring regime. The programme's currently rated amber at the end of Q4 1920, and that was as a specific result of reported COVID-19 impacts on those projects. Early indications are that this will improve by the end of the Q1 2021 period, and I'll provide an update on that at the next meeting. So in summary, I guess it's a challenging year, but we have the project and programme controls and monitoring regime in place to ensure that the growth deal is delivered in its entirety. In addition to the monitoring of growth deal progress, the board were keen to secure an independent view as to the early impact of a selection of the most advanced investments made via the growth deal on the Solent economy. With this in mind, economic consultants AECOM were commissioned to undertake this piece of work. Now, Lauren, if you can load up their presentation, that would be great. And whilst AECOM were admitted to the meeting, I'd like to introduce Andy Rumfit. Andy is... Sorry,
apologies. Just before you do, and picking up a point that one of our forum members made earlier, Just to remind the Growth Forum, at the last meeting, we did advise the Forum that this work was underway, and the Forum requested that they be given the opportunity to scrutinise the work, both in its development and when it's concluded. So we're bringing back this particular section at the request of the Forum. The work is at a very early stage, but we're really keen to hear your views on this very early stage of the work, particularly given you were keen to see it. And then we can take that away and use it to shape the final evaluation work. Apologies for that, Steve. I just thought it was useful to signpost why we were bringing this forward at this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and it's a useful background, of course. So, Andy, I can see you've now been admitted to the meeting, which is great. Andy's Director of Economic Development, and it's Andy's team that have been leading on the impact assessment work, and he'll be taking you through a few slides in relation to the work undertaken today. Thanks, Andy.
Over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Rumford from ACOM. We can just put the slide presentation for the first one. So we've been looking at 18 projects in detail. We're waiting a bit of more detail on the 19th. This makes up about 45% of spend of the 183 million local growth deal. Obviously, as you know, it's across a range of investment areas. The projects involved were between 2015 and 2018, so they tend to be some of the earlier ones. Some of them are complete and some of them are still underway. What we're trying to do is explore what's been happening with outputs to date, how delivery's been going, and the direction of travel for wider, longer-term benefits for the Solent area. The objective is to be able to communicate the benefits and values of the local growth fund to a variety of stakeholders, but also identify any lessons or recommendations for future project monitoring and evaluations. Just go to the next slide. So in terms of looking actually at delivery progress, if we start from the bottom, the very good news is the actual outputs as specified in the grant agreements are all being delivered. So this would be the hard outputs in terms of floor space, kilometres of road, investments in IT, where it's something like that, a number of courses being provided. There's only one where there's a slight issue that we're looking at the moment. So broadly, what the LEP has been financing with partners is actually coming about. In terms of budget, there's been some slippage on a few projects on budget, one more significant than the other. These tend to be more like a 5% cost overrun. That said, all of the projects will have some form of contingency to cover any cost overrun. The original decisions were taken using optimism bias that allows for any cost escalation, so the decisions still remain valid. And in the application, the grant agreement and the due diligence, we tend to look very carefully at who is actually liable for the cost overruns. In terms of timescales, there have been some slippage on some projects. It's really broken down to two effects. The first effect is projects that actually start late but stick to program. So they say they start 3 months late, they finish 3 months late. And there are some projects that actually run on a bit, something like maybe about 3 months. And it's an area we're going to look at in a little bit more detail to understand exactly what's going on and why, as Anne-Marie says in the further bits of the work. Just go to the next slide. And then turning to the net additional impacts. So the first thing, what we're saying is these are impacts that would not have come about otherwise. In terms of how you look at these things, a significant amount of investment would have been happening. Some projects might have gone ahead, but this is what's additional. And at this stage, and this is only for a subset of projects, what we can see is every pound of local growth deal funding has been unlocking £1.6 of funding from partners or the private sector. This is leading to a range of impacts that we're kind of looking at in a bit detail now, up to 700 new jobs, which are worth about £80 million a year in terms of GVA to the economy. And by simple maths, you can see if those jobs persist for 10 years, they can be 800 million. There are also jobs that are being safeguarded by some of these investments that might have moved or gone or been extinguished, and that's another 700 jobs. So you're looking at currently up to about 1,400 jobs. In terms of development impacts, some of the money has been helping bringing forward development. So you've got up to 500 new dwellings with feed-through effects in terms of additional spending by residents that can be also a benefit, and also land value uplift at various sites. Obviously, part of development impacts are those projects that provide additional commercial floor space, and we've got to a total of up to about 12,000 square metres, which tallies with where the new jobs are being accommodated. And the last area of impact is really investment around training and education. And again, this is providing additional training floor space, additional courses, and additional apprenticeships, of which there's up to about 1,300. Just go on to the final slide. So those are all the benefits we've been able to quantify to date. We're going to do more work looking at exploring them and also the wider ones, but just to give you some of the other perhaps softer, less quantifiable benefits that we see coming about. So there's the LEP strategic added value, which can do with coordination of projects and alignment, which is technically addressing a market failure. There are the wider impacts of transport projects, which can be around air quality, noise, moving to active modes that we want to explore and see if we can add in a bit more detail. The R&D benefits of investing in an area in terms of building up a cluster where you get agglomeration benefits and in the technical term spillovers. There are the wider impacts in training projects in terms of improving the local training provision, making it more demand responsive. And then also the softer benefits in the development projects, building confidence, raising the profile to investors, and making effective use of land assets in the area. So overall, it looks like it's a growth deal that's on track, and we probably want to explore some of these wider benefits a bit more in the further work we're doing.
Thank you, Andy. Lauren, you still have the slides up. Are we going back to the... thank you. Does anybody have any questions at all for Andy, Steve? Tony? Tony, you're muted. Tony Briggs, you are muted.
No, I'm not there. On the delays, which are around 30%, has there been any added costs because of those delays?
Andy?
At the moment, we need to go and look at that project by project. So we're actually looking at the impact of delays. I think the simple answer for some of them, probably yes, for others, no.
Okay, I see Steve has got his hand up.
Always keen to come back on a point such as that one. In terms of cost overruns, they're managed very, very tightly, but they are managed by the projects themselves. So where we do see cost overruns occurring, the LEP investment is protected via a mechanism in the funding agreement that offers our funding as a percentage, either a percentage of the total project costs or a cash value, and it's whichever is the lower of those two things. So whilst there are cost overruns, they are reported to the LEP, and our role within that is one of monitoring the likely impact of it. Clearly there is, our role is strategic, it's oversight. Delivery will be done by the project beneficiaries themselves, but our investment is protected as a result of that mechanism within the funding agreement itself.
Thank you.
Tony, have you any further question?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Dan, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. what I wasn't too sure about, although we've got some positive outcomes there, are what those outcomes are measured against, so what the objectives were in the first place, specifically on the return on investment. So, you know, did we have a benchmark of what we were aiming to get as for every pound we spent came back, and then what does that look like in versus the reality of what we've got? Thank you.
I think Steve wants to come back and answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up the point about return on investment in a moment, but in terms of the simple sort of headline outputs for the growth deal, there were 3 rounds of growth deal funding, and fundamentally across those 3 rounds, the funds we secured were to provide 6,000 jobs and effectively 11,000 homes with other skills and transport related outputs that Andy's talked about. So we're going some way to delivering against those at present. We are actually, in terms of the outputs overall, set to significantly overachieve against those numbers. And based on the most recent report we submitted to government, we're looking at around 15,000 homes and somewhere around 7,000 jobs. So we're looking to overachieve on those areas. It's a similar story for the skills, the amount of improved college floor space as well. So there are targets that are enshrined in the growth deal documents with government, and we are currently on track to exceed those, which is positive. In terms of the unlocking funding, I think there is a wider aspiration, so not just direct match funding, but other monetizable economic benefits to unlock at a ratio of 1 to 4. So, you know, for every pound we put in, £4 of economic benefit is unlocked elsewhere. In terms of the match funding piece, the calculation for that is relatively simple, as you would imagine. You know, we're in very good shape in relation to that. In terms of the wider impact, that's really the next phase of work that ACOM are in the process of undertaking, and obviously that's more challenging. But we do have a clear way to get to, you know, a solid, sound, robust calculation at the end of that. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I think it's a really important question that Dan asks. And the evaluation for us is really, really important, not just because it's an independent verification of where we are, but because it's part of the next stage of the journey of the growth deals. So the upfront investment that we provide enables the capital work to take place. And once the capital work is complete, whether it's a building, a road, or some other enabling infrastructure, the real work begins, Dan. So the work to realise the value of that investment, and certainly the work that Andy and the team have done at ACOM is a really good, strong starting point, because we're looking at investments that were built between the period of 2015 and 2018, as Andy said, and already they're starting to deliver economic outputs. And we can see that if we do those sort of forecast uplifts on GVA, for example, it would compute through to something like £600 million worth of GVA. And our growth deal, we signed up to benefits equating to 500 million. So that's a really positive position. I think what's really important about the growth deal is, in many senses, we need to keep scrutinising this, keep looking at it, so that as we move through the projects that have completed, we are working with the scheme leads to ensure they have delivered the jobs or the housing or the other outputs that Steve alluded to. I think the one area that's going to need particular focus is housing. Because clearly with housing schemes, there is quite a significant amount of upfront expenditure, whether it is utilities or land acquisition, etc. And then the houses are delivered. So Steve talked about the housing targets we have, and we absolutely are in a position where the contracted activity that we've got on the books should deliver houses around the 15,000 mark, as opposed to the 11,000 that we've got in the growth deal, but they're not up yet. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, how does the economic environment that we're all working in now, particularly with the global pandemic, impact on projects? So in the next phase of the AECOM evaluation, we absolutely do want to get those wider benefits captured that Andy alluded to at the back end of his slide presentation. But we also want to keep an eye on whether the economic shocks that the economy is experiencing at the moment are going to impact on projects, how they're going to impact on projects, and what role the LEP can play to work with scheme leads to sort of minimise that. So I hope that helps in terms of the journey around the outputs themselves. So we're absolutely on track, really strong starting point, but we need to keep an eye on the programme as we move through the next year or two. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Anne-Marie. As regards housing, I hope that's not any in the Gosport fair and strategic gap. Dan, are you happy with the answers there?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just make a comment, really, or perhaps a request, which is that I don't know in terms of what the work plan is on this, but leverage is absolutely key at driving continually up. And it would be helpful to understand what other LEPs are doing UK-wide, what other really successful regional areas globally are doing to leverage that output so that we can learn from them. If we're really to drive this economy forward, we want to spend more public money, obviously, on infrastructure and investment, but we want to drive up that leverage curve as much as possible. So I would be interested to see how that works, who the leaders are globally, and what we can learn or pinch from them and put here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. I'm sure we can take action on that. Any other speakers at all? Oh, sorry, Brian.
Yeah, just picking up on Dan's comment. Yes, we'd love to give you back some information. Interestingly, it's something we've been doing as a board ourselves. We work with the other Southeast LEPs in a wider group to try and look at good practice. But there's an organisation called the LEP Network, which joins all of the LEPs together. And so we get an opportunity. But recently, they've done a thing which came off the back of the review, where we've been teamed with another LEP, in our case Lancashire, interestingly, because their economy is and their size is not unlike us. And so we've been having a series of workshops with them just to look at how we do things, how they do things, and seeing if there's areas we can pick from them and they equally from us. And whenever you do these things in any walk of life, you always learn a better idea of doing things. So it is an area the board have been looking at themselves. So I think I think the board would all nod to a person with we need to make sure we're using best practice, and we're trying to do it, but we will try and bring some of that back to you next time.
Thank you for that, Brian. Right, I have no other people indicating to speak at all. We now go on to agenda item 4, the Solent LEP response to COVID-19. This is a verbal update. Who is presenting that one?
Chair, thank you. It's myself, and
okay, Anne-Marie.
Taking forward again some work that the LEP has been doing in response to the coronavirus pandemic. I think Lauren has a couple of slides here too, so whilst she is getting that ready, what we wanted to do in this final item for colleagues on the forum is almost bring together the previous items and hopefully address some of the questions that forum members have asked earlier. So Lauren, if you could go to slide 1, please. Thank you very much. So just linking through from where Lichfield's concluded their work, we're all very aware now that global economies are reopening for business. The level of state intervention to support businesses in the UK is still extremely high. It's unprecedented. And we're moving now from the sort of emergency stimulus measures that government brought in, such as the furlough schemes, the support for businesses, some of the loan funding schemes that they brought forward, to a period now where the focus is very much on restoring economic activity and recovering. And you will have heard earlier from Kieran and Lucy that we are going to be tested. The resiliency of the economy is going to be severely tested. For us here in the Solent, we have seen a 35% drop in economic output, which is enormous. But we are expecting a bounce back, so that by the end of the year, we're looking at economic contraction of around 13 to 15%, which is still very significant. And I think in this first phase of the economic emergency, the big issue for businesses has been cash flow, trying to get through a period where you want to continue to support your staff, you want to continue to support your business, but you don't actually have any revenue because your business is closed, is perhaps the greatest challenge for any business. And if we move to slide 2, Lauren, thank you very much. Lucy alluded to this diagram earlier. You can see right on the right-hand side of the page, the extent of the sort of collapse in activity, and it really is exceptional, you know, even when compared with previous recessions. And what I wanted to do for colleagues was just show how that's hit our sectors in a very different way in the Solent. So if Lauren goes to the next slide. Thank you, Lauren. We've done a sort of RAG rating on our key sectors. So you can see, although the supermarkets have traded throughout this period, they're still sort of flashing amber. And we are still seeing issues around disruption to supply chain, sort of getting things onto the shelves in a timely manner. There is also a huge number of measures they've taken to comply with social distancing requirements. So by no means are they businesses that are in jeopardy, but they are businesses that will see their bottom line operational financials look slightly more challenging this year than in previous years. And if we move to some of our other sectors there on that first slide, we are expecting to see in the Q3, Q4 period of 2020, areas like insurance come under pressure as they start to pay out on claims across the spectrum of activity. We will see some quite heavy losses being reported, and it will be interesting to look at the financial services sector in general, but insurance is being singled out as an area where there could be a high level of risk. And if we click to the next slide, Lauren, perhaps some of the sectors that forum members might be specifically interested in. There was a question earlier about visitor economy and hospitality and tourism. Clearly, some of the first areas to completely shut down and probably some of the last areas to open up, and you can see that reflected in the risk status. The same for aviation and travel, and that's particularly germane here in the Solent. When you think of our visitor economy, you think of the cruise industry, and you think of our cultural assets. They are clearly taking a hit at this point. So what does that mean for the Solent? If we look to the next slide, Lauren, thank you. We've been very much focusing our work on the sort of immediate position, the short term and then the long term. So since we last met colleagues at the Growth Forum, a lot of our work has been emergency response work, where we've had businesses present really quite challenging cash flow issues that threaten their very existence. And a lot of our business support work has absolutely dealt with the reaction to the lockdown. We're very much now moving into a sort of short-term period where we are looking at how do we support businesses to become more resilient. And we are also starting, as we have in the forum today, to think about the recovery phase, which is something that we see going through to 22-23. So more specifically for the LEP, if we click forward to the next slide, Lauren, thank you very much. In the period April to end of May, our work was very much on business support. We set up a dedicated hub. We've been responding to requests from government for things like PPE and ventilators, and businesses in the Solent stepped up for that call and have actually made an amazing contribution to that area. We've put in place some coaching and mentoring to help our businesses with their cash flow problems. And we've also, as SJ talked about earlier, brought together a dedicated task force. But what I want to go on to in a minute is the funding programmes, because I know there was a question earlier about funding and are we getting things out quickly enough, both in the recovery phase and, as you can see there in the middle column, the restart and restore phase, where we're also starting to think about how we now help businesses to restart as lockdown eases. and then finally the recovery phase. So Lauren, if you could click through to those next couple of slides, please. And the next one. Thank you. So in terms of the hub, I just wanted to give you a flavour of the extent of the traffic. It's not all about funding. Obviously, that's really important, but a lot of our businesses wanted signposting to things like the furlough scheme, signposting to the banks that were offering the business interruption loans. And you can see there, you know, we've handled over 20,000 engagement with businesses, signposting them to various destinations to seek the support they needed. And if I click to the next slide, Lauren, the extent of our engagements can be actually sort of categorised into simple signposting, which you can see there, actual light touch activity where we've sat down, albeit virtually, with businesses and actually worked with them to provide a recovery plan. And there's been over 2,000 engagements in that regard. And then if Lauren goes to the next slide, we've also had to do some very high intensity engagements, which is where businesses have been looking very much at their survival and be working with government to help specific businesses with a package of support measures to get them through this period. So some of the support functions, when we've surveyed businesses, have been seen as probably the most important part of the work we've done. And we do operate there on a 24-hour turnaround, very quick indeed. And it has helped certainly a number of businesses to survive this very, very intense first phase of lockdown. But if I go to the funding piece next, and if Lauren could click to that. Next slide, Lauren. Oh, sorry. Okay. There's two things I wanted to pick up, which I think Tristan asked earlier. One was the speed of funding, and I think it's true to say that it is important we look at the governance, but it's also important that we bring forward programmes that can respond to the immediacy of the issues. And there's two things we've been looking at there. One is we have brought forward a new crowdfunder platform. This is getting money to businesses within weeks rather than months. We'd be very happy if the forum was interested to ask Crowdfunder to come and present to the next forum if that's of interest to colleagues as they seek assurances about the speed that we get funding out the door. But to date, the money that we've put forward there has supported over 100 businesses, and it has been literally small amounts of funding to assist their cash flow. The beauty of this platform actually goes back to something Kieran said earlier. It is about matching community donations on a pound-for-pound basis to allow businesses to work through the lockdown period. So we've had a number of visitor economy small businesses such as bed and breakfasts, hoteliers, various event destinations, raising money through pledges from their community for vouchers or future visits, and we've matched that pound for pound, up to £2,000 for micro businesses and £5,000 for larger businesses. We are now moving forward to look at wider funding as part of the recovery stimulus Steve alluded to earlier. We have announced in the last week that we are putting over £5 million into the A326 enhancements down the Fawley Waterside and the University of Portsmouth Virtual Reality Centre, which is very much a project for the future. And we have submitted a proposal to government under their local infrastructure stimulus fund initiative. They gave us a week, and in that week, working with all our stakeholders, local authorities, private sector, the education sector, we looked at 68 projects which had a combined value of £0.9 billion, and those projects were looking for £300 million worth of government support. At the moment, as of today, we're in active discussion with government on 11 of those proposals, which would have a combined value of £277 million. And we're seeking £47 million worth of government funding to make that a reality. And that would generate 4,000 new jobs. and 13,000 construction jobs. So obviously, if we can secure that, that would be an incredible stimulus. I'm aware that this is material that is very fast moving. So in terms of line of sight for the forum, some of this we can't bring to you as it's happening now, and we're really keen to make sure we do keep the forum up to date with what's happening today as well as yesterday, and I think it will continue to be fast moving, Chair. But what we will do post the meeting is circulate some links for forum members to the wider information that we've brought together for things like Solent 2050 and the recovery work that we're doing, as well as bringing to the forum the up-to-date information. So that's a canter through where we are with COVID and the work we're doing, and very happy to take questions, and also very happy to bring back some of that work in more detail, Chair, for scrutiny at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anne-Marie. Lauren, can we go back to the full screen, please? Thank you, Lauren. Members, has anybody any questions at all for Anne-Marie? Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Anne-Marie, we had a chat the other day about the scope of this, and this is really just to seek your guidance on something. In the last couple of days, a lot of the city regions have made quite big plays on the applications they've made to government. Liverpool stating their 1.3 billion request, the West Midlands and other areas. That's obviously given them some narrative, one, for their residents and their businesses, but equally, two, to government to say, you know, we're parking this on your lawn, how much are you going to give us? Is that they're requesting the same as what we put our request in through in terms of the same pot, or same project, sorry? And at what stage can we, as the Solent region, then say, right, this is our application to you, government, as well, and what are the mechanisms for promoting that to the Solent region and the wider world? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think some of it will be the same. Obviously, I'd have to look at the detail. Regions such as Liverpool and Manchester are mayoral combined authorities, so they will have, as part of their wider discussion, an ongoing dialogue about securing significant government funding as part of their devolved arrangement. So they inevitably do get very significant settlements for infrastructure and transport that's devolved locally. So on a like-for-like basis, it's probably, in relation to the examples you mentioned, a combination of responding to this opportunity and the broader opportunities that they have as a region around securing additional funding through the sort of mayoral combined authority structure. For our own area, yes, we will be putting out a release about the totality of the pipeline. You know, 0.9 billion is a really, really good response. It shows that there is strong optimism in the economy, that with the right sort of support, businesses, local authorities and our education providers can actually bring forward new activity, which I think is a really strong sign. And there is within that almost £250 million worth of activity that actually genuinely could start within the time frame that the government set for this particular call, which is they're particularly looking to fund projects that can start and complete by December 21. So within the work we're doing, there is a really strong pipeline of activity, some of which can't finish by 2021. But we want to make sure that government have a very strong line of sight on that, because the recovery plan isn't just about the period to 2021. So it is important to socialise that information and start that dialogue as well. But as in all things in life, I think affordability is going to be a key determinant as to what regions receive what money, and we feel that the proposals that we've been able to bring together from our stakeholders are very strong proposals in terms of the deliverability piece, which government are clearly focusing on at the moment, which we understand, because clearly getting some immediate stimulus going is critical. So I'll have a look at the Liverpool stuff. offline, Dan, but on a like-for-like basis, slightly different architecture. They're dealing with significantly bigger sums of money because of the mayoral combined authority architecture.
Thanks for that, Anne-Marie. I have Susan now. Susan, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Graham. I just wondered how smaller businesses are made aware of how the funding that can be offered is available to them.
Thank you, Susan. That's a very, very important and critical question, and sometimes lost in the sort of money side. And I think the reality is that we are working through a number of intermediaries, Susan, to help with that work. There are 50,000 businesses in the Solent. We have strong engagement, but certainly not with 50,000 businesses. So through the task force that SJ chairs, we work through the 9 local authorities so that we utilise those contact points and those networks, which are vitally important. We're also working hand in glove with our business representative organisations, including the Chambers, the Federation of Small Businesses, Business South, again, to make sure that their member networks have a strong line of sight with the offers that are available. And we've also been working through intermediaries to deliver funding. So we are working at the moment with Natural Enterprise, who are a rural organisation, offering funding packages to support our rural businesses because they are very well placed. They have those connections which are stronger than perhaps the connections we would have. And similarly, Crowdfunder, it's a very similar story where they have a network that we can reach through. And we also engage through forums such as the New Forest Business Forum, again, working with local partners to ensure that we can learn from the links they have and work through them. We can always do more though, Susan, such as the scale of the challenge that we're working with. I think we're always keen and open to engaging with new partners and new intermediary bodies so that we reach as many businesses as possible. And in that regard, we have got a secondee from NatWest as an expert in residence to help us expand our networks, not just through the banking sector, but through areas like the legal professions and accountancy practices, because their networks with small businesses are really strong as well. So that's where we are at the moment, but we can always learn more. And if there's any feedback colleagues on the forum can give us to help strengthen our offer, we'd really welcome it.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Anne-Marie. In fact, Susan's question was quite apt because there was a business in Leon Solent that worked for home, and it took over a business unit in Fareham, applied for a grant, put in all the estimates, etc., and it was turned down because they said they don't believe he could do it with the quotes that he had. Well, he has done it. He's come under the budget. It's there, and I'll be opening that in a couple of weeks' time as chairman of the Solent Growth Forum. So, we have to support small businesses as well as the large multinationals. Philip, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. No, it's in a direct response to what Anne-Marie had suggested. I very much welcome sending us the links, etc. And of course, we can use Huddle to deposit documents to share in our own time. And specifically request the things to be brought back. I personally would very much appreciate the suggestion that the crowdfunding mechanisms and how the LEP interfaces with them and manages them and ascertains how well governed. That would be a good topic for me. Thank you.
Thank you, that Philip, and thank you, Dan, for your note to everyone about the write-up yesterday. Do I have any other questions from members? Alexis.
Just unmute myself. My apologies for getting trapped in the waiting room because it's got my wrong name on there, so you probably thought I was an infiltrator. Just a question again about the businesses such as events management, where they do not qualify for any grants at all because they don't have premises and their businesses have completely gone overnight. Do you have any help for them at all?
Yeah, it's a really important area, and not just for the Solent, but generally, all the packages that have been brought forward, either nationally or locally, you know, are of a scale we've not seen before. But as in all things in life, some things do start to fall through all the offers. So there is some general help out there for businesses such as those like the furlough scheme to support staff, so they can be paid while the event management or business is shut. But we recognised that that in itself would not help, because one of the particular challenges with this sort of business is their income stream has literally been choked off overnight, so no revenue coming in, and they're the last of all the business sectors to reopen. So the gap between when they last earned revenue and when they will earn revenue again is significant. That's why we introduced Crowdfunder. We've had a number of businesses take advantage of that, and of all the sectors, the cultural, visitor economy, event management sector has been the biggest beneficiary. Is it enough? Probably not. We are about to look at a sort of Crowdfunder 2, which will be focusing, rather than on cash flow, it will be focusing on support for those businesses restarting. So many of them will have to put out or expend money on social distancing adjustments, whether it's screens or signage, in order that the visitors to their particular settings can visit and the setting can comply with the social distancing guidelines. So we want to help there as well. So we see that coming forward in the next sort of 2 to 4 weeks. And we're also keen to work with those businesses on the digital agenda. This was something that was mentioned earlier in the meeting. One of the things that a number of those businesses have advised is that they'd really like to do some more around strengthening their e-commerce platform so that they can start to use online platforms to trade, and we have been putting on a number of support sessions for that, but we are looking to bring forward a grant opportunity as well to help those businesses to get the right equipment, because some of these platforms are reliant on you having the most modern or up-to-date equipment. It's not just about you know, the online or web sort of platform, it's also about the equipment. So there are initiatives that will continue to come forward, but it is challenging. I think we all recognise that.
Thank you for that, Anne-Marie. Alexis, did you want to come back?
Yes, could I just add, you obviously refer to businesses and it conjures up an image in your mind of what a business might look like. But the people that I'm thinking about in particular, and I know 2 or 3 in the area, they are literally one-man bands, but they do organise these big events. Events are shut down completely at the moment. They don't, as I say, they don't have premises. They don't actually have staff. So again, overnight, you've gone from an individual who manages events around the country going to absolutely nothing, absolutely zero. And, you know, I keep hearing businesses, which I agree with, but it conjures up an image of maybe premises, you know, shops, or you're talking about furloughing staff. Well, they don't have any staff except for themselves, and they don't qualify for anything, but they still have mortgages and other things to pay at home. And they've tried the local council, which doesn't help because they don't fit into this very, very small criteria box that applies to them. So you might think events management are these great big events that carry out at the O2 and things like that. But there are different types of events management. And, you know, I'm just thinking of a number of one-man bands that I know of who've lost their income overnight, and they don't fall into any net to help them at all.
Yeah, I think it's a point really well made, and we've started to work with. Most of the work we do on Crowdfunder are micro businesses, so they are single person endeavours, and most of them are either working from home, producing things, or working from home, offering a service, which I think is what you were describing there. And I think we've started to work. One of the challenges for event management has been the lockdown. And we've started to work with a small number who are looking to bring events forward now that are very different to perhaps events in the past. So, for example, one of the businesses is a business that's looking to do kind of open air cinema type experience, very different to what they were doing before, but their skill sets in organising events are being brought forward, albeit with a different type of experience. So crowdfunder works very well with that, but we're certainly happy to take offline specific examples to see if there are other forms of support out there that might be appropriate. So certainly offline, if there are one or two examples you'd like us to explore, we're very happy to do so.
Thanks for that, Anne-Marie. Dan, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Anne-Marie, would it be, I don't want to make this onerous, but if there's an easy way to do it, a lot of the work that we've been doing around the grant, specifically in Southampton, and trying to support businesses, you know, the easiest way to get in contact with people is via social media, definitely at the moment, albeit not everybody is using it. Is there a mechanism where we can just get sent something from you guys if you want us to promote it? Of course, we may see what you're promoting, but it's much easier even if we just get a link sent to us via email or to everybody or whatever, that we can then just copy and paste and use to say, you know, if you want to apply, this is the mechanism to do it. I don't know. I don't want to make it onerous for you, but a simple way of doing something like that would be helpful.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's a really good idea, Dan, and it makes me think we probably should have been doing this before for the forum, so apologies. We have been using the Business Support Task Force group where we've got local authority representatives on that group, but actually if we do two things, it's not onerous is the first response. We'll make sure that all Growth Forum members get our sort of newsletters which have the sort of contact points on. They come out every week and they will have various details of things that are going on in this particular sphere of activity. And I'll also make sure that post the call, Lauren and Nicola furnish all with the contact points for our Growth Hub. That is the one-stop sort of, if you like, signposting service that we signpost businesses to, because they have a really good line of sight of everything that's available at the moment. So we'll do both things in that regard, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I've got Brian.
Just a quick comment for that, because I do quite a lot of social media stuff, as Anne-Marie often says. Anne-Marie, what we could do, thinking about it, is get our, particularly sort of Twitter, where a lot of this is done on, people to coordinate with all of our local authorities ones. Because just doing a quick check whilst you're answering down there, our tweets about the funds we've put out have not referenced, they've not put in a hashtag for all the authorities in our area, which if we did, they'd all automatically spot them and then be able to retweet them quicker. So we could just set it all up much more automatically, I think. So I think it's a good point, Dan, that we'll get all our social media coordinators to make sure that they reference each other and things going forward, just to make it quicker.
Thanks for that, Brian. Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. Just rewinding to the culture and heritage theme that was mentioned earlier, and some thoughts around theatres. Portsmouth, Southampton, the Mayflower, and of course here on the Isle of Wight, Shanklin Theatre, one of the first establishments to be closed, and even with the announcement for reopening of smaller businesses, tourism businesses across the country on the 4th of July, theatres across the country and within the Solent area will remain closed, even if the 1 metre distancing rule is applied. Most theatres would only then be able to accommodate a 50% audience, if you like. It's certainly not worth their while financially. So for the long term, it's apparent that theatres will not be operating anytime soon. So as regards to financial support, I believe that's really key. That impacts on all businesses in and around every theatre across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Members, do we have any more questions at all? Okay, we move on to item 5, any other business. I'll go around the screens that I have in front of me. Lauren, do you have anything? Thank you. James, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
Tony, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
Philip?
No, thank you.
Brian?
Thank all of the participants for coming along and asking us such good questions. We really value the feedback.
That's that right. Michael?
No, thank you, Graham.
Tristan?
Nothing, thanks, Chair.
Derek?
No, thank you. It's been very informative.
Susan?
No, thank you.
Alexis?
No, only to say that I have just looked up the crowdfunder on the internet, and it might be. I share useful information on some of my Facebook pages, which often gets quite good response of people who are hard to get to. So it might be useful for me to add this link to, one of my postings, if that's okay.
Fabulous.
Thanks for that, Alexis. Sophie?
No, thank you.
Dan?
No, thank you, Chair.
SJ?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Anne-Marie?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Steve?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Nicola?
No, thank you.
Peter? Okay. Well, members, we have no other business. I close the meeting at 10:32. Sorry we overran by 2 minutes. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.